If you enjoy horror stories, don't forget to like the video and subscribe for more. New horrors drop every day, some you'll remember, and some you won't. Let me know in the comments, where are you watching from, and what time is it for you right now? Now let's begin.
It began with a door. Not just any door, but one that had not been there before. James Whitlock found it while cleaning out the basement of his late uncle's Victorian manor in upstate New York. The door was sunken into a wall that, until a week ago, had been solid concrete. He was certain of it. He'd knocked on it before, remembered the sharp clang of stone. But now, it was wood. Old, blackened, riddled with wormholes, and sealed by 4 thick iron bolts. It stank of mildew, rotting meat, and something worse beneath, a coppery, spoiled scent that curled through the air like smoke. He paused, a flashlight clutched in one hand and a pry bar in the other. The air around the door was colder than the rest of the basement, unnaturally so. His breath plumed in the dim light. No one else was in the house. His uncle's death had left him as the sole heir, and James had come alone, intending to spend a week cataloging antiques and settling paperwork. He hadn't signed up for this. Still, curiosity had teeth. He crouched in front of the door. The bolts looked ancient, hand-forged. Rust clung to them like barnacles. They should have been impossible to budge, but one by one, they gave way under his leverage, screaming like metal dragged across bone. When the final bolt clattered to the ground, the door creaked inward. A low breath seemed to escape from the blackness beyond. James stood, heart hammering, and raised his flashlight. A narrow hallway stretched before him, lined with crumbling stone, slick with moisture. A slow, rhythmic dripping echoed from deep within. James hesitated at the threshold. He thought of closing the door, bolting it shut, pretending it had never been there. Instead, he stepped through. The flashlight flickered. Then died. Total darkness swallowed him. James stood frozen, heart pounding in his ears. He pulled out his phone, fumbling to activate the flashlight. The glow was weak, the battery at 5%, but enough to reveal the walls around him. Rough stone. Moist. The smell of rot and iron thicker now. Like something had bled here. Recently. He turned back. The door was gone. Only wall remained behind him, seamless, unbroken. Panic bubbled up in his throat. Then a whisper brushed his right ear. "Stay." James spun around. Nothing. No one. Just endless corridor. He took a tentative step forward. Another whisper. "You were chosen." His foot struck something hard. He looked down. A cracked porcelain doll's head stared up at him, mouth frozen mid-scream. Its eyes were filled with something black and wet. He backed away, then stopped. The hallway behind him was changing. Stone walls breathed in and out like lungs. Veins of red light pulsed beneath the surface. Shapes shifted in the gloom, flickering like shadows behind frosted glass. James turned and ran. Not far ahead, the corridor twisted sharply, opening into a space barely larger than a closet. In the corner, a small wooden chair faced the wall. On it sat a bundle wrapped in burlap and rope. James approached. He reached out and peeled the fabric aside. Inside was a notebook. The cover was soft. Too soft. He realized with revulsion that it was leather, human, he thought without knowing how. His fingers trembled as he opened it. Words scratched and rust-red ink filled the pages. It's not a place. It's a need. It opens when it's hungry. It closes when it's fed. We are the echoes. We are what's left. And below that, you are the next chapter. James staggered back. The walls pulsed around him. He wasn't alone anymore. And the room was waking up. James ran until his breath burned in his chest. The phone flickered in his shaking hand, casting warped light across the wet, glistening walls. A sound followed him now, soft dragging, like something crawling across the stones behind him, always just out of view. Then the corridor ended. A thick fog seeped from a gap in the floor ahead, rolling over the stone like spilled milk. Cold and damp, it clung to his skin, and brought with it a smell he recognized, lavender and burnt plastic. The scent of his childhood home. The scent of his mother's room, just before the fire. He stood paralyzed. A voice came from within the fog, low, deliberate, like dry paper torn in slow motion. "You brought it with you." James turned. A figure stepped forward, emerging from the haze like a memory forming from a dream. He was tall and hunched, draped in a threadbare coat stitched from pieces of cloth that didn't match. Some patterned, others hospital white, one scrawled with handwritten equations in faded black ink. His eyes were not sunken, but deep, ancient, as though something older was looking out from behind them. "You're not the first," the stranger said, his voice calm, as if they were speaking in a coffee shop rather than a maze of horrors. "But you might be the last." James's voice came out hoarse. "Where am I?" The stranger tilted his head. "You already know the answer. You came looking for it. It came looking for you." James felt dizzy. He steadied himself against the wall, which shuddered like flesh beneath his hand. The man pointed toward the fog behind him. "You want out. But the room is a spiral. The deeper you go, the more it becomes you. The more you become it." James narrowed his eyes. "Are you real?" The stranger's smile was sad. "Are you?" The fog parted behind him, revealing a domed chamber that pulsed like a lung. Long stone pillars supported a ceiling veined with something wet and glowing. At the center stood a stone well. The whispers flowed from it like steam. James followed. "This place, it doesn't kill you quickly," the man said. "It erodes you. Drip by drip. Memory by memory. Every step is a trade." James peered over the edge of the well. It wasn't empty. It was bottomless. And it was staring back. A single, lidless eye, wide and pale, sat in the dark far below, gazing up at him. He stumbled back. The stranger placed a hand on his shoulder, firm and cold. "You have a choice, continue feeding it, or stop becoming its voice." Its voice. The room speaks through those who remain too long. Words are its currency. Thought is its sustenance. James backed away slowly. The whispers became clearer. They weren't speaking random nonsense. They were speaking in his voice. Telling stories he barely remembered. His 6th birthday party, the time he got lost in the woods, the last words his mother ever said to him. "I don't want this," James muttered. "I want to wake up. I want out." The stranger nodded. "Then stop remembering. Stop feeding it." James turned to leave. But the fog had closed in again. And the room would not let go so easily. The fog thinned, only to reveal something worse. James emerged into a vast hallway with a ceiling lost to darkness. The walls were carved from smooth black stone, glistening as if coated in sweat. The air pulsed, almost imperceptibly, as though the room was breathing around him. Along both walls, embedded like gravestones in a mausoleum, were plaques. Dozens. Hundreds. Each bore a name. Some etched deeply. Others half erased, smudged like chalk left in the rain. He stepped closer. Marlena Burns. Raphael Trench. Andrew Whitlock. His breath caught. He blinked, leaned in. Yes, there it was. His uncle's name. Andrew. Next to it was a small slot in the wall, and inside, barely visible, was something pulsing. Organic. Pinkish. like a memory trying to grow its own skin. James stumbled backward. He turned. And saw his own name. James William Whitlock. Etched cleanly. Newly. The letters gleamed with fresh carving. He stood frozen, breath fogging the air. Below his name was a mirror the size of a book, sunk into the wall like a locked door. The reflection showed not his face, but versions. Dozens of versions. James smiling, crying, screaming, aged into wrinkles, or younger than he remembered. In each, something had been taken. Eyes gone. Lips missing. A hole where his thoughts should be. From the hallway's far end came a dragging sound. Something slithered toward him. Slow. Rhythmic. Wet. James turned and ran, boots echoing over the slick stone. Names whipped past him like a gallery of the dead. One name flickered, then vanished. Another screamed out loud as he passed it, just one word, howled from a mouth that wasn't there. Remember. The hallway tightened. The plaques became more erratic, some scratched out, others layered over each other like desperate graffiti. He caught flashes of phrases instead of names now. Mother. The dog with no eyes. The girl in the garden. James stopped. He felt something in his hand. He hadn't been holding anything, but now, he was. A toy car. Bright red. Scarred from years of play. It was his favorite as a child. One he buried in the backyard when he was 7. He remembered doing it. He didn't remember why. The car dissolved in his palm. And the room whispered. One less piece. James fell to his knees. I don't want to forget, he whispered. But he already had. Behind him, his name flickered. Then dimmed. James wandered blindly. The corridor behind him had sealed again. Where the hall of forgotten names had stretched moments ago, now there was only flesh, thick and veined like the inside of a living creature. The walls pulsed with a low, syncopated rhythm. The ceiling dropped lower with each step, until he was hunched beneath it, his shoulders brushing muscle-warm stone. Eventually, the corridor opened into a new space, vast, silent, cold. The archive. Here, bookshelves rose like skeletal trees, twisted and uneven. They stretched far beyond what any room should contain, folding into each other, impossible in size and scale. Paper fluttered in the air like ash. There was no dust. No scent of parchment. Only the sharp smell of iron and ink. James stepped forward. Books bled when touched. He reached for one bound in something leathery. As his fingers brushed the spine, a deep gash opened in the binding, oozing thick black fluid. The title etched into the cover shimmered with letters he couldn't read, until, somehow, he could. The Day He Let Go. James opened it. There, written across its pages, were the events of a single moment from his life. The day his father left. The way the door slammed. The sound of his mother not crying. The exact number of cornflakes he ate that morning. Things he had long since forgotten, documented in terrible, obsessive detail. As he read, the words began to vanish. Each sentence dissolved into darkness. Ink faded into scar tissue. When he reached the final line, the page simply read. To remember, you must bleed. A voice spoke from behind a nearby shelf. Don't read too fast. You'll lose more than you gain. James turned. A woman stood there, backlit by the red glow of a lantern shaped like a human heart. She wore robes fashioned from stitched-together pages, her face veiled by shredded photographs. Her fingers were long and ink-stained. Who are you? James asked. I'm the binder, she replied. What you lose, I archive. What you remember, I rearrange. She stepped closer. You've been unspooling. Threads cut loose. But it's not too late. you can take pieces back. James clutched the bleeding book. How? She extended a hand. Her palm held a small blade, obsidian and pulsing. Give flesh. Trade it for memory. The room respects sacrifice. James stared at the blade. He remembered the garden girl's words, cut something into yourself. With trembling fingers, he took the knife. He knelt before the bleeding shelf and pressed the edge to his arm. Pain bloomed. Warm. Real. Blood struck the floor. And above, the shelves groaned. One of the books slid free and fell into his lap. He opened it. A face smiled up at him from a photograph tucked between the pages. His sister. Her name was. He gasped. He remembered. Not just her face, but her laughter, the song she used to sing, the time she pushed him into the lake and pulled him out before he could drown. Tears filled his eyes. The binder knelt beside him. You've paid for one truth. Keep bleeding if you want more. James wiped his face. And lifted the knife again. The world bent sideways. James stepped beyond the archive and into a corridor that coiled like a serpent's spine, crooked, looping back on itself, every surface glinting like polished obsidian. The air was thin here, dry and sharp, as if even oxygen had to beg for permission. The walls reflected him. At first. Then they didn't. He saw versions of himself in the mirrored glass, smiling when he wasn't, running when he stood still, screaming with mouths that didn't belong to him. Each reflection had something subtly wrong, an eye missing, a twisted wrist, a face too old or too young. They flickered between frames of memory, broken scenes played out like corrupted film reels. James moved carefully. The corridor narrowed, widened, then doubled back. A child version of himself appeared at one turn, crying silently in the glass. At the next bend, his reflection was covered in burns, whispering words he couldn't hear but could feel beneath his skin. Then he saw her. His sister. Alive. Laughing. She reached toward him through the glass, beckoning. He ran to her, heart racing. The mirror cracked. Not like breaking glass, more like splitting bone. A fissure ran from top to bottom, and a hand reached through it. His sister's face melted away like wax, revealing his own beneath it. But this James had no eyes. Just hollow sockets and a bleeding grin. You left me, it rasped. James staggered back. You're not real. The thing stepped through the mirror. I remember what you forgot. I am the you that stayed. James turned and ran, but the mirrors now showed dozens of him, some weeping, some dead, some watching. The corridor pulsed like a heartbeat. The room was laughing through every pane of glass. And somewhere in that twisting maze, the real James began to forget which reflection was his. James stumbled through the last of the mirrors, breath ragged, mind fraying. His boots scraped stone again, real stone, or what passed for it here. The obsidian glass behind him cracked in spiderweb patterns, whispering fragments of lost selves. Ahead, the path widened into a vast amphitheater carved from salt-white bone. Columns rose like spinal cords, curving up into an arched ceiling of overlapping skulls. Each skull had its mouth open, frozen mid-scream. They weren't decoration. They were listening. The center of the space held a platform, and on it, a door. Not like the one from the basement, not crude or rusted. This one was made of something almost translucent. It pulsed with breath, its surface thin like stretched skin. Inside it, something moved, twisting, turning. And whispering. The whispers weren't random this time. They were his memories. Don't leave me, said his sister's voice. I'm proud of you, said his mother. Why didn't you come home, said a voice he couldn't place. The words spiraled around the chamber. James stepped toward the door, and every echo grew louder, crashing over him like waves. He dropped to his knees. Voices rose from the bone seats encircling the platform. Shapes formed in them, echoes. Transparent, broken versions of people James had seen or forgotten. The man from the fog. Eleanor. His uncle. The binder. The garden girl. Each sat in a seat, watching him, silently mouthing things he couldn't understand. Then a new voice rose, deeper, wet and vast. It came from the door. You've reached the threshold. You've heard the room. You've bled. You've broken. Do you remember who you are? James struggled to speak. I think I do. The door rippled. Then choose. A shape unfolded from the wall behind the platform, a second door. This one made of brick and iron, sealed shut by chains. It didn't whisper. It didn't breathe. But it called to him with a promise of silence. Forget, said the iron door. And leave. Remember, said the living door. And finish the story. James rose to his feet. His hands trembled. One path meant peace. The other, purpose. Or perhaps, destruction. The echoes in the seats waited, unmoving. James stepped toward the living door. And placed his hand against its skin. It peeled open like a wound. He stepped through. And the room swallowed him whole. The passage closed behind him. The light died. James found himself suspended in warmth, not heat, but the kind of stifling comfort that makes you forget the world is dangerous. He drifted, weightless, surrounded by pulsing light. The air was thick with the scent of copper and wet earth, like soil soaked in centuries of blood. He wasn't standing. He was floating. Above. Below. Direction had lost meaning. Shapes moved around him, limbs, faces, fragmented memories with no beginning or end. They spiraled through the thickening fluid that now clung to his skin. A lullaby whispered through the dark, in a voice he hadn't heard since childhood. Sleep, little fire, sleep until ash. Sleep, little boy, sleep till you crash. James screamed. The sound was swallowed instantly, devoured before it could echo. He blinked. The world changed. He stood in his childhood bedroom. The posters were still on the walls. The twin bed, the green carpet, the cracked toy chest. Everything preserved in uncanny stillness. A thunderstorm rolled outside the window. But something was off. The air shimmered. Objects pulsed like they were breathing. Shadows moved where no light fell. His old stuffed bear turned its head toward him and blinked. James turned to run, but the door was gone. In its place stood a tall version of himself, wearing a crown of bones. You can't finish what you forgot, the crown, James said, voice full of rot and dust. But you can write a new end. James clenched his fists. You're not me. No, it said. I'm the part you buried. The part that grew in the dark. I am the room's seed, and you. Its mouth stretched wider than any human mouth could. You are the soil. The room trembled. The carpet melted into liquid teeth. The bed stretched and rose like an altar. You have one chance, said the crown, James. Tell the room what it is. Name it. Bind it. James fell to his knees. His mind burned. He reached into his jacket and pulled out the notebook, the one bound in skin. Its pages fluttered. Blood wept from its spine. He opened it. And began to write. His story. The truth. The room screamed. He wrote. Not with pen or blade, but with thought. The words that spilled across the bleeding parchment did not come from memory. They came from pain. From terror. From the tiny, pulsing fragment of hope that had not yet been swallowed. Each letter carved itself in red, not ink, his truth made manifest in a language not taught, but remembered. The room is not a place. It is a wound. It is the gap left by grief unspoken, by stories never told, by names forgotten and left to rot. It is what grows in the silence left behind. The Crown James shrieked. Flesh peeled away from his face, revealing something pale and eyeless beneath, like wet bone, still breathing. He lunged for James, but the air warped between them, the notebook pulsing with light. James kept writing. It was made by a man who couldn't let go. Who built a temple to memory and buried himself alive inside it. My uncle. Andrew. He was the first voice in the wall. The walls cracked. Screams echoed through the room. Not human screams, but the cries of every memory devoured. The bones of the altar bed splintered. The floor melted to black ink, dragging the Crown James backward, howling, his body unraveling like burned cloth. But James didn't stop. You feed on fear. On forgetting. But I am not afraid. I am not forgotten. I am the archivist now. The book slammed shut. Silence. The room began to collapse, not in ruin, but in transformation. The shadows peeled back. The pulsing walls slowed. James felt the weight lifting from him like chains rusted through. The crown fell to the floor with a hollow clatter. He stood in a void now. Clean. Quiet. In the center, a new door. Unmarked. Plain. Real. James stepped to it. He looked back once, not in fear, but in mourning. Goodbye, he whispered. He turned the handle. Light. James opened his eyes to birdsong. For a moment, he thought he had died. Sunlight streamed through a window, real sunlight, not the false glow of the room. He was lying on grass, dew-damp and cool. A field stretched around him, filled with wildflowers swaying in a gentle breeze. Beyond it, woods he almost recognized. Trees with familiar scars in the bark. A hill where he once broke his wrist falling from a bike. Childhood terrain. He sat up slowly. The notebook lay in his lap, dry and clean. No longer bound in skin, but simple leather, aged and cracked. James opened it. The pages were blank. Not erased. Cleared. He stood. The world was quiet. Birds, breeze, distant cars, yes, even that. Civilization. He followed the hill down to a road and then to a small town. No one recognized him. His name wasn't in the registry. His ID was missing. When he finally found a mirror, the man who looked back had silver at his temples, new lines around his mouth. Time had passed. Weeks? Years? He didn't know. But he was back. He took a new name, Ellis. He rented a room above a bookstore. He wrote. Not about the room, not at first. Just words. Thoughts. Pieces. Enough to keep the silence at bay. But the dreams returned. And so did the whispers. Only now, they weren't cruel. They were, remembering. Grateful. Sometimes he'd wake with names on his tongue, others who'd been trapped. He'd write them down. Stories of places folding inward, of time stitched wrong, of eyes blinking behind mirrors. He published them. People read. And they remembered. He understood, now, what the room had become. Not a predator. A library. And James, Ellis, was its curator. He didn't fear it anymore. But sometimes, late at night, he would go to the mirror and whisper. I'm still here. And somewhere, far beneath the waking world, the room whispered back. We know.